Hello, my name is Arthur. In the last video we left off having created this small shell or grenade type of explosion. And we'll just work off of what we have going here to save some time. That way we don't have to redo a material that's going to be pretty much exactly the same process as in the previous video. So we'll make this one a part 2 video, and we'll just look at modifying some things to make a different kind of explosion. I've watched a few explosion videos, and yeah, we'll try to do something a little bit different than we normally see in such videos. So what we're going to need to do is set the emitter to emit 2 billion particles. And no, I'm just kidding. This is where we're going to vary from other videos is we're not going to emit a whole bunch of particles. Like in the last example, we used one whole particle where people are generally, they're going to show, oh, let's turn up the particles from 1000 to 2000. Well, we can do that. I've done that and made bigger explosions. But I don't see that it makes a lot of sense to render a 64 by 64 or 128. The largest resolution I'd be considering in my game effort would be around 256 by 256. And that would be a large building explosion. So I don't see the purpose in making the explosion have thousands of particles and use up 6 gigs of RAM to create that little explosion. So we're going to do something smaller. So we'll take our plane into edit mode, and this will be a bit experimental. Sometimes I just subdivide the plane, but we're going to try something more specific. So first off, we'll loop cut it, and then we'll loop cut it again in the other direction. And that'll give us some starting point. And I'm just looking at that, wondering if that's going to be quite the right starting point. Yeah, we should be able to function off of that. So we'll just take the middle of this plane and pull it up a little bit. That's going to get us particles shooting in a few different directions. And we can select the whole plane, and we can randomize that a little bit. So we'll go transform and randomize. And that's going to just crinkle our plane up a little bit. Then maybe from a top view, actually with our camera angle, this should be fine the way that it is. So we'll go to a front view, and let's change our emission number to 6. And we'll make those 6 particles have a lifetime of around 6 frames also. Actually, let's just try at 5 and see what we get from that. Now I'm thinking a lot of these other settings, there's not going to be a large need to change them. Maybe we could increase fuel a little bit. And then maybe it would be an idea to increase the initial velocity and get it coming out of normal. So let's just play that and see what we're getting for particle movement. Let's try that around 3. We'll back up a little bit. There's enough of the smoke simulation at the 128 resolution that it starts slowing my computer down, and how much RAM gets used isn't just going to be up to particles. It's up to how much smoke is being generated, because it's the fluid that's actually consuming the RAM. I've never checked with a smaller explosion like this what level of my RAM is being used. I have 16 gigs and I'm on a fairly old computer, so something like this starts slowing me down a bit. So I'm thinking that I could use just a little bit more spread on those particles. And probably the way to do that in the direction that I'm looking for would be to do something like that. What I'm doing is I'm just changing the normals so that they're going to come out more rather than upwards. So let's try it like that and see what kind of explosion we get. So that's looking about right. Let's see it in terms of the camera. And we'll get the camera into a square resolution. So let's put it back to 64 by 64. And for this graphic, I'd probably be looking at something around 128. So we'll just zoom out a little, get that framed in there. And none of this is actually even showing in the animation yet. We still have to do that part. So we'll go back into a front view. It's not until we get into the settings for the smoke domain that any of these changes actually will start showing. So if I was to like just put my cursor into timescale and click out of it, it would start baking a new version. But because the 128 is going to take longer to bake, just for the demonstration, I'm going to reduce it in half. That'll give an idea for what our explosion looks like now. And do it in a short amount of time, but this will need to have a little bit more resolution to come up with something that's reasonable. Now that's going too fast, so we'll probably come back to 1.5 on the time scale. Let's slow that down a little bit. We'll have a look at that through the camera. So I would say the next thing to do would be to reduce the buoyancy density and the heat. So we'll get these into a default. Sometimes it's the smart thing to do is to pause because I initiated 2 changes and 2 bakes that way. Whoops, that was not the camera. I was looking to raise the camera there. Oh, I don't have it in the scene or the light. Well, that's what's going on. So that's getting in range. That's a small explosion. That could be like a tank type of explosion. And, well, it's just a demonstration, so this gives an idea for how to go about creating different shaped explosions and to take more control over it than you would have if you took this plane and you went, well, I'm going to emit 2,000 particles from it, then I'm going to put 3 other planes emitting in different directions. I would say that that process, maybe that's the kind of thing you would want to do if you were making a movie in Blender. But for making a computer graphic for a video game, this seems a little bit more realistic. So about the last thing to do is to get a look at that in a different view. So I would say that for this explosion, the emission strength could get dialed back. And when we get into an explosion of this size, having a closer look at our color ramp to get something that's more realistic would be in order. And because I turned up the resolution for the viewport, it's going to take some time to render this up now. So the thing that I would do with this now is to turn up the resolution of the smoke domain. So I would be looking to increase that to, I don't know, I've been using 128, but I've also done renders at 256, and they start looking pretty good even for the small amount of particles that I'm using. And we could have a quick look at resources and see what kind of resources are actually going into this. Yeah, so this is only at around 2.4 gigs. That's pretty reasonable. Yeah, when you start getting into big explosions, it doesn't take very long to be chewing up 6 gigs of RAM to generate that. So personally, I think that's overkill for a video game graphic, and that this is more in range of what I'd be looking for. And it's got a pretty nice effect. Like, you got the particles shooting up, some little fireballs at the end of the particles. You have a pretty decent control over this type of action, which has a fairly reasonable effect to it. So I hope this was useful, and yeah, I'm not sure what I'll do in my next video. If there's some requests, I could probably go through some of the different settings more one by one, and we could have a look at what they do in a less slow fashion that wouldn't involve having an explosion, but would look at sort of going over the different settings that I know and just demonstrating what they do and the different effects we can get out of them. But until a later video, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do, so take care.